Good evening and welcome back to Zoom In on a Fresh Conversation. Tonight, our special guest is award-winning author, publisher, and owner-operator of Ladero Press, Ladero Design Works, and soon to a new venture, Pen to Press, Ms. L.D. Robinson. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, L.D. Zoom In on the Fresh Conversation
Thank you.
You're welcome. Zoom In on the Fresh Conversation is brought to you by Eilers Diamonds, LLC, Milton McCulloch, author of Love and Emancipation, L.D. Robinson, owner and operator of Ladero Press, and a Dante production, and the Fresh Book Festival, which will be in January 2022. We are so looking forward to it in 6, 7, and 8. Please put it on your calendar. I'm getting excited just thinking about it. I think that we're all so ready to be together and to network and to spread knowledge. So put it on your calendar, 6, 7, 8 January in the beautiful city of Daytona Beach. If you have any questions for LD, please put them in the chat box. We will go back to them at the end of the conversation. And this conversation is being recorded. It will be uploaded to Facebook, and then it will go to YouTube at the end of the evening. I think it will probably post at midnight. So look forward to that. And good evening, LD. Thank you, my friend. We've been busy all week together. And so I just want you to take a moment to tell people a little bit about yourself.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is L.D. Robinson, and I am a publisher, an author, a consultant in hiding, and I like to read.
She's a reader. Right, exactly.
I'm a reader.
And so tell us about, now what she's being very meek and mild, of course, but she used to be a 6-figure corporate tech consultant, and she's an award-winning author. So tell us about that journey from 6-figure corporate, flying around the world, being on the go all the time, to say, this is not what I need something different.
Well, it wasn't exactly what I expected, the transition. I came home in 2016 from a very rigorous consulting engagement and thought I'd take a break like I'd done normally when assignments were pretty intense and time consuming. I thought I'd just be home for a few months, get some things done at home, and then I go back on the road. That is not what happened. It's been 5 years and I'm home, and 2 unexpected businesses have come to fruition, and I consult still, but it's not in the same way. And it's been a huge transition. I'm excited though. I know that I'm supposed to be doing this, and I'm okay with that. I will say that at first I was wondering, like, okay, what's going on? Because it was not the easiest
of transitions. Here yes. I am making 6 figures.
I had a why me?
Right. But what you didn't touch on is that sometimes there are things that happen in our personal life who make the pivot possible, yes. or you have to make it possible, right? I never thought I lived yes. in the state of Florida, but my parents were here, and that's, well, so, you have to make a pivot and make the best out of, the situation the hand that you're dealt. And so with you coming home with that, and we don't have to get into all that personal stuff, but in doing that, of course, your family comes into play. Life comes into play, death comes into play. Yes. And then you have to decide that, I'm no Bible person. So, but I do think somewhere it said that you bloom where you're planted. And so that's what you decided to do, right? To go from where you were back to home.
I really did. Within a week of being home, my father's mother passed. And So I was back on the road, but I was back on the road to Rochester so that we could lay my grandmother to rest. Just shortly over a year, 2 years after her passing, my other grandmother passed, my mom's mom. And a year and a half after that, my biological dad's mom passed. And so in this entire time that I've been home, I've buried all three of my grandmothers, which has been, in itself has been quite challenging, having been quite close to my grandmothers. But the transition between that and work and starting a new career that I did not see coming at all. You just simply have to sort of, take your place and, and see what God has really in store for you and ride out the journey. And, it's given some time for some real hard conversations with him and some mirror holding, too,
Right,
hey, Londa,
right.
this is you.
Yeah, yeah.
And that doesn't always, that's not always the easiest thing when you see yourself and you're like, oh, I look like, oh, that's me.
And sometimes it's hard to look at the woman in the
just,
mirror, right? Exactly. It really is.
Oh, yes.
And so we want to talk about your publishing business, but let's talk about you being an author. So you have written several books under a pen name. And so tell us about why you decided, first of all, to write under a pen name. Second of all, the different genres that you write in. If we could discuss that for a moment.
Yeah. So I decided to write under pen name because I'm a romance reader. I read lots of romance. And although I don't read as much romance now, unless there's something coming across my desk, but I read a lot of romance. And I knew that I was going to, I had some other books in me that were business centered, if you will. Right. And I knew that I wanted those to be under my professional name, which is LD Robinson. And in the course of that, I just was led to put it under my pen name. And when I, was thinking about a pen name, I took the first two letters of my first name and the first two letters of my last name and came up with Laro. And the last name, Clady, is my paternal grandmother's maiden name. And so that was a bit of a homage to my grandmother and my two great aunts with whom I was quite close as well. One is still living, and so she's a reader, so she reads everything. Do you have any new books out?
Right.
Yes.
And can you give us information on how to get those books? Are they still being able to be brought?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So you can find all of our books you can find my books online. You can order them from Ladero Press, but you can also get them at Amazon.com and other booksellers as well online. I write, I have a short story series, East Coast, West Coast romance series. And so that's a little bit based on what I know from living in those parts of the country from my consulting career. So it starts in Seattle and it goes to DC and Virginia, the DMV, and then it heads back over to the West Coast.
Now, I know you have no time to write now. And so we both are being challenged to finish books, right? So in 2022, are we looking to finish a book?
Yes. I would love to finish several books that are stuck in my head up here, right? I have Jacks on the Rocks, which is the fourth book in the East Coast, West Coast series that I'd love to get out. I know that story, I think, beginning to end, unless Jacks changes something. I've been trying to get that out. Also, from an inspirational standpoint, there is a book that I'm led to write, which is titled Destinations, Detours, and Divine Plans. And it's based on what I've experienced these last 5 years and how life really offers detours, and
Mm,
sometimes we don't understand what those detours are, but at the same time, some of those detours are part of the divine plans. I could see that very clearly with my grandmothers and my being home in order to help take care of them as they transitioned, as they made their transitions. So, you know, what I thought was a detour, I believe was their prayer being answered about how
right,
they wanted to leave here.
right.
And I would not trade it for anything in the world. There's no amount of money to replace that experience for me. Those are treasured memories, you know, with my grandmothers talking smack all the way to
Right,
the end.
right, 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 right. I think, I
Um,
don't know who says that, setbacks are setups for something better, right? So, you know, you just never know
oh
how it's
yes.
all going to work out for you. And yes, I think that when you look back on the last 5 years, there were things that were done. I was with you with some of those years, that if you had not been there, then their wishes might not have been
Mhm,
met, right? So, um,
mhm.
yeah, you were there for a reason. And so I'm sure um, it did not go unnoticed by those who need to know.
No. You know,
Right,
it's time that you can't trade. You
right,
know, with
exactly.
time with your families, you really can't trade. I would not have wanted to have been on the road during that time. I probably would have been figuring out how I could
Get back,
end
right.
a contract to be
Mhm.
home and get back home. And I didn't have to make that decision. And I'm very thankful that I was not in a position where I would have aborted a project with a client because I would have wanted to be home.
Right.
And so for that, I'm very thankful.
The pivot is
Um,
real. The
I
pivot
have
is
another
real.
book that's in my head.
Go ahead.
The pivot is real.
It's
It
real.
really is. It's very real.
What was it? You
Another
were saying
book
the other book?
is
Okay.
The Revelationary Leader. Yes. And that will be from our business imprint, which is one. And it's about the things that I've learned consulting in terms of leadership. Um, and some things that I've learned simply from starting two businesses from scratch
Right,
as well.
right, right,
You know,
right.
as my mom tells us, there are things that you learn from everyone, what to do and what
Yeah,
not to do. So
right.
I've got some lessons I think that come from professional experience to, you know, to convey
Yeah,
and how to
everybody, but
be
everybody talks about the itch, but nobody talks about the scratch. It's two different things, right? It is two different
two
things.
different things.
So there are 5 things about manuscript publishing that most first-time authors do not think about. Can you give us those 5 things?
I think one of those things is the number of times that you're going to touch that book. A lot of times once the story gets out, people are like, phew, I'm done. But the rest of the process has just begun. And as you go through editing, you are going to touch that book multiple times. The first time you see it in digital format, you see the ebook, you may find something that needs to be changed. You may find something that needs to be changed in a print proof. You may find something that is different, you want modified with the cover. So I think that not realizing that the process, in a lot of ways, the bulk of the work is just beginning after the story is written.
Right,
That's
right,
one thing. Uh, I think two, um, not necessarily realizing that in some ways you have to divorce yourself from your story in order to make the story better. And I learned that with my first book. Um, I remember distinctly meeting my aunt who, one of my aunties, she loves to read romance as well. And we met at Denny's and we sat down and she had pages of notes about hot enough to melt chocolate. And at first I was a little like, you know, I felt some kind of way, really. I was a little taken aback. But after I realized, after we went through everything, is that I learned in that moment that I needed to divorce myself from the story And if I wanted that story to be better, I had to be able to be able to receive the critical feedback regarding that story, because it was only going to make the story better. And indeed it did. The third thing I think is the amount of time that is involved getting a book done and to market it. A lot of times we get authors who come and they want their book published, next month.
Right.
And that doesn't always happen that quickly. In very rare cases do we get a book out. There are just a lot of moving parts. You've got formatting and typesetting, you have editing, you've got proofs, you have things that need to be printed, things that you really need to see in print, like covers, all those things. And they look different depending on how they're printed and what they're printed on. And so all the things that really matter in terms of, the colors being true to what you thought they were going to be. All those things really matter. And so I think that length of time that it takes to get a book out is not something first-time authors really think about. The other thing, I guess number 4, would be, I would have to say, just understanding all the moving parts of getting a book.
I thought you would say you have to read your novel like 4 times.
Oh yes, you have to read it. That is something that we tell all authors at Ladero Press.
Right.
We tell them to read your book aloud, because if you read your book aloud, you will hear what others are reading, and you don't necessarily understand those things, where a comma might need to be placed, for example, or whether you need a period somewhere. Maybe a sentence is like way too long, but you don't necessarily you may not see it reading it, but once you read it aloud, you get another feel for your book. You get another feel for the spirit of your book as well, and how it comes over to readers. And so that's certainly one thing that we encourage all the authors to do, is to read your book aloud, and you get the same feel that your readers will get. And so it allows you to make some of the most honest adjustments to your book, because you've heard your book yourself.
Now, do you recommend, and I've just found this to be good for me, is that Microsoft Word has an editor piece where it will read your whole document out loud, so that you don't necessarily have to read it for yourself?
Well, I don't know that I'd recommend it. And the reason for that is because you want your story is being told in your voice, right? And so because it's being told in your voice, you need to hear it in your voice and not an automated voice. You need to hear it the way that you've written it, in the sense of where the stops are in your story, where the starts are, where the pauses are, because all of those things matter when the reader is reading that book. And certainly if the book is, you're going to put it in audiobook format, you will want to know, even if you have someone else record it, where those inflections belong. You want to know where those are yourself. And I just think as an author, you owe it to your book and you owe it to your story to read it yourself.
Okay, and then the other thing I think that most new authors don't think about is how the manuscript is delivered. Tell me how you would want to receive a manuscript.
We request that manuscripts are delivered to us electronically and in two formats. In, I guess, 2 copies of double-spaced, one-sided, preferably, double-spaced manuscripts. We want them in print. And for the main reason for that is because with us, our first round of edits are red lines. And so we give you a hard document back so that you understand, you see in print. Sometimes things are lost when they're in electronic format. And we want to make sure that, one, the authors, we're not just here for the story. We want to develop good authors who understand the industry that they're working in, whether it's one book, 10 books, or 20 books. So we make sure that there is an editor's key on there so that you understand the symbols associated with your industry, the symbols associated with your craft, because that's extremely important. If you go somewhere else and they hand it to you, it won't be new. You will already have had an encounter with an editing key. And so one of the reasons we do that is because we read that document, we scan it, and we read, our goal is to read your document first, just no editing in mind. We read it first so that we get the full spirit of the story, so that we get to experience the story, hopefully in the way that you intended it. And so that makes a difference, so that when we go to edit, because we've read it, we understand, okay, this is what they meant by this. And so we understand that this punctuation is needed here. What I find is that when you read a story for the first time and you're editing it simultaneously, sometimes you miss things. And I have found that I've had to go back and say, oh, okay, this is the way that, they really intended it. So our goal here is for us to really read the story first, and then we edit. And that gives us a fairly well-rounded picture of the story and what the author intends.
And in the second part of the editing, there's other things that you consider, right? So for instance, and I've said this before, if you're writing a period piece, if you're writing in the 70s or the 80s or the 1900s, there are things you cannot do, like go to the refrigerator and get a bottle of water, right? And so those are things that the editing process will pick up, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so we use what we call a CPG, which is content, punctuation, and grammar. And so most people think of editing as solely as grammar and maybe punctuation, but editing in its fullness really looks at the whole story. Like, does this flow the way it should? Are the names still the same? I've read books where, the character starts out being John, and then later it's the same character. You find out, oh, they called him William, So those are the kind of things as an editor that you're really seeking to pick up, the continuity in the story. It's
leaving people on the street and then you never go back and get them. Like, you left those people on the street.
Yes, you just left it there. They're just hanging out.
They're just hanging out on 14th Street.
Yes,
right. You got to go back and get them. And so that's why editing to our first-time authors and to our seasoned authors, that's why editing is so important. So, this time is moving too fast for me. So tell us the difference. You're starting a new company. No, let me back up. From manuscript, editing, cover, binding of a 200-page novel, what's that time frame?
That timeline, depending on what's in our queue, is probably going to be anywhere from 9 months to 18 months. It just depends on what kind of work it is. If it's if it's straight writing, that may be something. But if it's something, say like a memoir, like our good friend, I think I saw her on here, Ms. Watley.
Yes.
If it's something like a memoir in which there's text and there are images and things need to all come together and be cohesive, then that becomes a longer process, because you really want that book to work at the end and be the complete story that you want it to be. But for us, it's minimally 9 months. Things have taken a little longer here in the pandemic, I'll tell you that. Wow. We've just had, numerous things that we just have not counted on with suppliers and materials, and just the interruptions of our supply chain, from our cover designers suddenly finding themselves being teachers to their children at home and not having, that time to work 12 hours a day, getting projects done. They're like, no, I got to teach my kids right now.
Like finding parts for your printers and press people. They're all from overseas,
Yes.
and if it's all sitting out in the ocean and not being brought in, you have to wait. So yeah, all those things are key. And so I want everyone to know that listen, there are people who say you can write a book in 30 days. I'm not sure I believe that. I believe you can write something in 30 days, but I think that it takes more than 30 days to write a significant novel, a significant book, because it takes a lot of work. And I think you'll find that you'll be happier if you take the longer length of time to make sure that it's in the, as we like to say, LD and I, in the spirit of excellence, that your book hits the market.
Yes.
So you're going to start a new company. I don't know, have any idea why you're going to do that, because you're crazy. But I understand that you have to keep your tentacles out there and to build continuity in what you do. So you have Ladero Press, you have Ladero Design Works, and we did not even talk about that. She is also a website designer, a logo designer, help with your cover. So what else do you do? Let's talk about Ladero Design. I know you've done my own personal logo. You've helped with the 2022 Fresh Book logo. You've helped with the University Embry-Riddle project that we worked on together. So tell us a little bit about Ladero Design Works.
Well, Ladero Design Works is a graphics and website company. It's a creative, it's really birthed out of the work that I did, trying to get my stuff, get the corporate stuff ready for Ladero Press. And so I was doing my own websites and doing my own graphics and designing logos and all those things. And as people saw it, they asked, well, who did this for you and who did that for you? And I said, well, I did. And they're like, well, can you do that for me? And so really it's birthed out of just the work that I've done with Ladero Press. We do streaming, we do graphic design, and that includes logos, we do social media, we make sure your posts look right, online, so things aren't, chopped off or missing. We do all those things to really help promote the brands that our clients have, and help them stand out and look good in front of their clients and their customers and their audiences.
What would be the difference between Ladero Press and Pen to Press?
Ladero Press is what we consider a small press. So in publishing, there are basically kind of 3 tiers of publishing. There's traditional publishing, and these are the really big guys, the big companies. They put out thousands of titles a year, and they pay royalties based on sales. Then there is a second tier, which is considered small press, and they operate in the same way in terms of the larger companies. They just put out fewer titles per year, but they pay royalties based on sales. And then there is what we call vanity publishing, or I like to call it pay to publish, and it's where people pay and someone else puts out their works for them. And there are a couple other areas in there. There's some firms that are sort of hybrids, they do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Some mix of some form, usually of 2 in the second and third tier. And so for us, we have found that we have a lot of inquiries from authors who desire to have assistance with self-publishing. And they don't want to be under the Ladero Press imprint, but they want the assistance in getting the work done. They want the assistance in getting accounts set up and knowing what they need to do in terms of ordering and shipping and distribution. And so those things we will offer under Pen to Press by Ladero, which we expect to launch in January. We've been doing a lot of the preliminary work. just based on some client inquiries and wanted to know, okay, so how do you do this? Or I want you to do this. Do you have a package, and we've had to sort of craft those to make sure that, we're sort of right sizing them based on one, competition, but also what we believe we're able to offer and do it as excellent as possible, so that our clients are pleased at the end of the day.
So now we have Ladero Press, we have Ladero Design Works, we have Pen to Press, and you talked about streamlining, videoing, and doing other things with your companies. Tell us what other things are possible.
I believe so much is possible. I think one of the beauties of allowing ourselves to be open to creative ability at work in us, regardless whether you are a woodworker, whether you're an author, whether you are a cook or a chef, maybe you're a baker. The more you do it, the more you find out what you're capable of doing, because it peels off the layers of your capabilities, because you're continually stretching yourself. You're finding out new skills and new sets that you didn't know you had. Some things out of necessity, when you're trying to figure out, like, how do I get this done? And you discover, like, oh, I'm really, I could do that. And so for us, video work, which we do some of with our streaming, we do that with clients as well. And we do some finishing work for video and as well. And with our streaming, we stream multiple things. We stream events, but we stream funerals as well. We stream services, and one of our goals that we do at Ladero Design Works is really helping places of worship, particularly during the pandemic, make the pivot from on-site worship to adding a virtual component if they did not already have one. Adding that virtual service component. So one, they didn't lose the engagement of their congregants who suddenly found themselves at home and not able to attend service. And so we really help different houses of worship, stay online. We help them go online and we help them stay online. If possible, and if necessary, we even offer the ability for them to stream from our account just to ensure that they're able to keep their services going and keep their congregants engaged.
When we worked together on the project for Embry-Riddle University, that was the first time I'd ever seen a virtual program, which was done magnificently. Tell us about how that has changed the game, because even for the book festival in January, there won't be a whole lot of paper in somebody's hands. It will be virtual. Tell the audience, please, exactly how that works. But the one we did was for Women's Month, right? Women in, yes, in the aeronautics world. And so we used it as a platform for the students of the university to just go online and to be able to get that history lesson. So tell us about how that visual is done, how you put a virtual program together and how easy it is for people to, just go to their phones and kind of flip through it.
Well, one of the things we use various different types of software in terms of what we call flip books. And so they are digital books, and it allows us to really take PDFs or JPEGs and convert them, or any type of image, and convert it into a format where we are able to create books. And that's everything with background music, if you want sparkles flying, all those things to really in some ways eliminate paper. We've had clients who have had programs that they wanted digitized. They were not going to do printing. And so one of our clients happened to be the Deltas, the Stanford alumni chapter of Delta Sigma Theta, which was gracious participates. And so one of the things is making sure where they've had to make pivots, where clients have had to make pivots, that we digitize those things so their audiences don't miss what they are used to doing. And if you've ever seen a Delta Gala book from the Stanford alumni chapter, alumni chapter, you will find that it is beautifully done. And so I think, you know, them being able to trusting us to take what they envision, what they've done in print for a number of years for their scholarship gala, and trust us with that to do that digitally for them. You know, one is quite an honor because it's a pretty big size book, but it's also a gorgeous book that you want to keep. It is not one that, you know, you want to put aside. It's one that you really want to keep. And so our ability to really help clients preserve what they typically do in paper, but do that digitally, is one of the things that we do. And so if it doesn't come in PDF, then we make it PDF, and then we do go through the conversion process.
So we're going to go back to the editing piece for a minute. My first book was published in 2008, so we know how tumultuous, that's a good word, I think, that was to try to get anything done in 2008 and without spending, you know, your life savings and a little blood from your veins. And in that regard, there are things that they didn't catch in the editing process, even though you pay, right? And being a first-time author, you just want your book out, right? So it wasn't. I think the biggest mistake most authors make first time is that we just blow the tenses, right? So Eyeless Diamonds 1 started out with I, and in the middle it went to me, and at the end it went to she, right? So, I mean, and I think that's what we just automatically do. And while you're writing. So tell us how important it is to make sure that our tenses, if you're going to start out with I, you have to stay there. If you have to start, you know, how important it is not to mess up your tenses in your book. Listen, my first one is like that. And
well, I think
we're going to take care of that. But
we'll take care of that.
Yeah, we're going to take.
Well, I think one of the things is really, we are so used to reading stories in which even when we tell a story verbally, we tell that story as he said, she said, they went, we did. It's always in past tense. And so if you desire to tell a story in present tense, you really have to sort of force yourself and train yourself in the process to write in present tense, because we speak in past tense. You know, I saw my mom yesterday. I talked to, you know, Donna on the phone yesterday. All those things we typically talk in past tense terms. Yeah. And because of that, we tend to write that way as well. It is very natural to write, he said, she said, they went. But if you're going to tell a story in present tense, you have to be mindful that it'll slip in very easily. Right. And you will go back and read and find, I switched to past tense from present tense. The person that you use in you telling a story is extremely important. If you're going to use first person, you got to stick with first person. You know, if it's talking about the main character who's telling the story, you got to stick with that. You can't all of a sudden, you know, become, as you said, she at the end. You know, you've been you were I in the beginning, so you kind of need to stay I along the way. Right. Oh no. Those things are quite important.
And so, yes, Mama Tony, your question was, isn't that part of the editing process? Right, it is. But in '08, all they wanted was your money and all you wanted was a book out, right? So you really didn't even think about the fact that you were using 3 different tenses in a 200-page book until you had somebody look at it like LD who said, like, Donna, what are you doing? So, oh no, I'm just trying to sell a book. Right. So I just wanted authors,
That's
right, I'm like, right. It's the first time authors to think about the tenses while they're writing and not be offended when your editor comes back and it's all red, right? It's not that they're trying to offend you, they're just trying to make your product better. Okay, so we have aspiring authors and seasoned veterans who could use assistance in developing their writing skills. I think one of the best things you can do to develop your writing skill is to read. But tell us, maybe from the publisher's point of view, what a writer can do to help develop their writing skills.
Read.
Read.
You just have to read. I meet a number of authors who are not readers, and typically that shows. Because if you're a reader and you are a reader who pays attention to what you're reading, even through a little bit of osmosis, some things are going to come through in terms of how to structure a story, how to, when semicolons are used and, when commas are used, how to use quotations. Some of that stuff is going to come through simply because you're consuming it. But when you are an author and you don't read, those things typically show up in terms of the way the story is written, what you see. Some things are, sometimes people just need refreshers and, punctuation and grammar, for example. Now, when it comes to content, making sure the story flows, that may be a little different. Sometimes you have people that have a very good story that flows very well, but is poorly punctuated, or maybe not so great in grammar, but the story itself is structurally sound. And so from an editing standpoint, we try to look at all those things and help the author develop in each of those areas, hopefully catching those things as they go through their story, particularly after the first round. After the first round of edits, once they start going through the story, they typically come back and say, okay, I see where I need to do some other things with this story to make it based on the feedback that I received. I see where I need to go back and make some things. And they themselves would kind of put the brakes on things and say, let me take care of this and I'll come back.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
But I think one of the biggest things to do is really just read. Right.
You have to be a reader in order to be a writer. It's important. It really is. So we have another publisher on the Zoom this evening. I'm sure she's just nodding her head saying those are all the good things you're supposed to do. What is the hardest thing about being a publisher and what is the most rewarding?
I think the hardest thing is trying to stay true to deadlines, because you have this grand plan of when things are supposed to occur. And then you find, the formatter, they become ill. The cover designer, has to deal with other issues. The bindery, can't, their supplies aren't being delivered. So those are all things we've encountered in the course of Ladero Press in these almost 5 years. We've encountered like all of those things where we've had a bindery, one of our binderies call us and tell us that, we can't get materials. And so we are stopping in terms of printing and binding until we can get this equipment and we can get these resources in to help us do this. We can't run our presses without it. And so those are things, I think, sticking to deadlines, can become difficult because you have things that arise that you don't always necessarily anticipate. They may not be supplier related, but they could be related to another book that now you've got to go in and do triage on because something was missed, something went awry. And so now you've got to spend time fixing that book, which takes away time from other works. And so when you're a company of 1 to 3 people, you can get stretched a little tight and a little thin.
The most rewarding.
I think the most rewarding
Mm-hmm.
is seeing authors smile about the books that they put out and the books that have their names on them. Mm-hmm. That is the most rewarding to me, is being able to send them the links and say your books are up and they are available and your books are ready to buy. That is very rewarding to me.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about the publishing business before we end our conversation this evening?
I think if you have a book that you want to write, I say just get to writing. The book will never get finished if you don't write it. And so for publishers, we're always encouraging people to spend some time writing. And that's very important. And, I really take my own advice because, when I spend a lot of time reading. And so, I might spend time that I could be writing. And we talked about this, I might spend that time on Netflix.
Right.
So, and saying, I can't get my book out. I'm so busy. It's like, but you just binged watched a whole Korean series on Netflix.
I do understand.
So I think being honest with yourself, I think, there are times I've had to go back and tell authors, not so good news. And sometimes it's due to my fault that, things have, sort of, perhaps fallen apart, not by intention, but simply because there are things that have interrupted. I mean, our first 3 books, 2 of the first 3 books we put out, they were being released right when we found out about my mom's mom in 2018. And so they did not get the attention that they deserved. And so we've gone back to revisit those books to make sure that they are in the spirit in which we like to address books. We've had books that we've missed things happen, and we've gone back and corrected those books to make sure that that author can really be proud of the book that his or her name is on. And that cost us in terms of money, but I would rather have an author know that the book that's out there with their name on it is one in which they can take pride. And for me, that is above all else. When people are entrusting their creative works to you, you got to handle them with care, in my opinion.
I'm going to look in the chat room real quickly. Of course, Miss Wadley thinks you're the best. LD is a fantastic editor and publisher. She's the best in her field. Let's see.
Thank you.
Okay, did you plan to go into writing and publishing before you left your corporate position? Or did that just kind of happen?
I plan to write. Yeah, I plan to write. I started my first book in like 2008 or 2009, and it was based on a conversation with my cousin about dating. And I told her, I was like, we were going back and forth having a conversation. And I, said hot enough to melt chocolate in response to something she said. And, I said, well, that really kind of makes a good title for a book. And so I started writing, a t-shirt. And work got really busy. And a t-shirt.
I have a t-shirt.
And it sat for a few years. I think I wrote the first 6 chapters, and then it just sat. And it was resurrected in 2017. And I had no idea I would become a publisher. I was looking for a way to get the book published, and I saw everything that was being offered. And in my mind, I really was only going to write, I thought I was going to write the one book.
Right.
And that was going to be it. But that has since, turned into several books and a couple of different genres. And I'm thankful. I didn't see the publishing coming, but I know that is what I'm supposed to be doing right now.
Exactly. Exactly.
I know it's what I was supposed to make that transition.
So now we'll ask you for contact information and your pearl of wisdom.
Well, you can find us online if you look up laderopress.com or laderodesignworks.com. You can find us online. You can call us for either company at 888-369-6206. That is our corporate number for Ladero. And pearl of wisdom, I would say, don't be afraid to explore your creative abilities. All of us have been given creative ideas. We've been given, inventions, all kinds of things to make some part of the world function better, with either more efficiency, to be more effective, or even if you write, fiction, it's
Right.
for better relaxation, right? Somebody benefits. We've all been given that. So I'd say don't be afraid to, tap into your creative abilities, even when the seasons of life change, whether they are expected via, say, retirement, or unexpected from, a career change that you didn't see coming. And just tap into them. It's well worth it to see all the other things that are possible, because of the creative power that's within you.
Thank you very much. This has been a conversation with L.D. Robinson, and she can be reached at, give us the number again.
888-369-6206.
And we thank you all for being here. We're looking forward to excerpts of Mahalia from Janice F. Kearney, The Snotty Nosed Kids from Mr. Todd, The Tool from Mr. Stan, and we look forward to seeing you all. And the book that Miss Miller has in her that we're going to get out in the next year or so. She's got a journal.
Yes.
Make sure that you write it. We're going to be on you for it, Miss Miller. Write the book. Don't leave it. Don't leave it in the book. Don't leave it in the journal. And so, good night, everybody. And see you next week. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.